Are you tired of your damage dealers using Nerf weapons? Hello everyone, Bront, CatHerder here. We're having some fun talking Raid Shadow Legends, and thank you Raid for sponsoring this video. We are here on the free-to-play account. We'll be probably on the main account occasionally as well. We are going to talk about damage dealers today. We're going to talk a little bit about ways you can build your damage dealers. Not going to go super deep into it, but I'm going to talk about ways you can make your damage dealers better. I'm talking about things you can do to make your damage dealers better as far as team building is concerned as well. And overall, some of the most important tips for taking your damage dealers to using Nerf to using nukes. First of all, we're going to start with, well, take a look at my Kale on my free-to-play. Why my Kale? Because he's going to make a point for the basic anatomy of a nuker build. So, Kale is a nuker. He's also a nuker that can use accuracy, so because he can do damage based off of accuracy, you're going to want that accuracy to help him land some debuffs. Not every nuker needs accuracy, even if they do have debuffs, however. And that's going to be a decision up to you. Sometimes you're going to decide that I want this champion to nuke for so much damage that I am going to forgo the accuracy that allows them to land their debuffs regularly. Or in some cases, you really even don't want them to land their debuffs. That can happen in some cases. Otherwise, sometimes in Kale's case, for example, being a poisoner, he's going to do damage via poisons as well. So you want him to land those poisons, and that's going to help. So you're going to want some accuracy on somebody like a Kale. Outside of that accuracy, what kind of stats are you looking to put on your damage dealers? Well, the first and most important one to look at is going to be on the gloves. And the gloves are going to want to be either crit rate gloves or crit damage gloves. And here's the thing about nukers. The way damage works is damage works as a multiple of your attack stat for an attack-based champion. For some of the other champions, it might be HP or it might be defense. But regardless, it's going to be one of these three stats is going to be the base multiplier for your damage. If you crit, you then increase the damage by that crit damage multiplier on top of everything else. So getting bonuses to your attack is going to give you a small amount of additional damage. Getting bonuses to crit damage is going to be huge, but only if you can 100% crit. Now, not every champion needs to 100% crit. In fact, you could argue that Kale doesn't need it because Kale's big AoE nuke actually has a 15% extra chance of inflicting a critical hit. That said, he can still do damage on this ability, and he can still do damage on his A1. So building him with 100% crit rate is not a horrible thing to do. But if you're looking for him to be the wave clearing with this ability, you only need 85% crit damage because you can get the other 15% here. And in some cases, you might be able to get somewhere else. But why is 100% important? You might think, well, technically, if I were to do the math, sometimes the math leans to crit rate and crit damage kind of having a synergistic effect where you don't need to max one of them out. The problem is in the games where you can not max your crit rate and go for the huge crit damage, you're doing a large number of attacks. Those tend to be action games where you might hit 10 to 20 times, in a given couple of seconds to minute, and you're going to do so many attacks where it doesn't matter if a few of them are not crits, because most of them will be, and that damage will stack up. In Raid, we want consistency, we want reliability, because you're going to be running the same dungeon again and again and again, and you don't want to be in a situation where with a 70% crit rate, for example, occasionally you might get unlucky strings of no crit, no crit, no crit, no crit, and suddenly you didn't wipe a wave, and that wave is going to kill you instead. So you want that 100% crit rate on your champions first. And that's why I mentioned building some with a crit rate glove is a viable option, particularly early on when you're going to have trouble getting crit rate substats. So instead of getting crit damage on the gloves, you can get yourself crit rate on the gloves, get some bonus crit damage on some of these other things, get a few more other stats around on these other pieces, like these boots right here, which are fairly nice for 4-star boots. That'll give you enough crit rate to get to that good threshold of 100%. so that you can then get that extra crit damage. So you might ask yourself, Bront, why would I rather have crit damage gloves than crit rate gloves? Well, here's the thing. Crit rate gloves max out at 60% for 6 stars or 50% for 5 stars. Crit damage gloves max out at 80% or 65% for 5 stars. That extra 20% stat is harder to make up when you are running other pieces of gear, because for substats, crit rate and crit damage have the same numbers that they have available to them on various pieces. So getting yourself more crit rate is just as easy as getting yourself more crit damage from a substat. So you might as well get the extra crit damage from the gloves. On top of that, we have ascensions, and ascensions magnify that even further, because crit damage ascensions gives you an extra 20% crit damage, whereas a crit rate ascension only gives you 10% extra crit rate. So if you can get crit damage gloves to work on a build, you can make a much harder hitting champion, because that crit damage is going to magnify your damage overall. Next up, the chest is going to be pretty simple. The chest is generally going to be, what is the damage stat of the champion you are building? Now, there's a couple cases where it may not matter. And there's one case specifically. It's not going to matter on champions that have a max HP damage dealing ability. That is not going to really be affected too much by the main stat that deals damage. That said, other abilities that do damage will be impacted by that, so you may continue to want to use attack. In some cases, there's some extra multipliers involved with their attack and the max HP hit, so having some attack on the chest would be good for an attack-based max HP hitter. But in general, if you're talking about a max HP hitter, you can often put just a tankier chest on them, so HP or defense, and that's going to give you more survivability with a ton of extra damage. You know, if you're looking for damage just by pure multipliers, so you're looking for the normal, straightforward attack damage dealing champions or defense or HP, you're looking for an attack, defense, or HP based chest. If you need accuracy, you still want one of those 3 chests as much as possible, because the place you could get that accuracy would be on the banner. Now, as you can see, I don't have an accuracy banner on my Kale, because this Kale build is honestly very old. I just have not really bothered to update it, because it does everything I need my Kale to do in, well, where I'm currently using him, which is not many places anymore. But the attack on this is flat. Same with the HP, same with the defense. Accuracy is always flat. So the difference between an accuracy banner and an accuracy chest is negligible. The difference between an attack chest and an attack banner is actually fairly big, because this percentage chest is going to do more than a flat attack might give me based off of what my stat is here. In this particular case here, 50% attack is going to be 600 attack, because my base of 1,200. That's an extra 600 attack compared to 255 for a 6-star flat attack piece. So yeah, I'm going to go percentage. It's going to make a big difference. Boots are going to be a little bit of a up for grabs. Boots generally in the current meta, if you're dealing damage in arena, you probably want a speed on your damage dealing boots, just because every champion needs to go fast, and the meta is so speed oriented that not having speed on your boots is really difficult to make up unless you have really amazing boots, and honestly really amazing rest of your gear as well. So it's probably going to be speed boots. But if you can build your champions fast enough and tune them properly, and you're doing PvE content, there's a reason you might decide to go again with attack percentage boots on an attack damage dealer, or HP boots on an HP damage dealer, or defense boots on a defense damage dealer. Just make sure that they're not so slow that they are never going to take a turn. So as long as you're getting to that 200 to 250 speed with those percentage boots, the build might be perfectly fine. On top of that, some nukers don't need a ton of speed because they have retaliatory attacks or they have other ways to do damage that don't involve them having to take a turn regularly. That said, I think having the ability to take a turn when you want them to take a turn gives them more general utility. So overall, I tend to go for speed boots almost all the time on my damage dealers, unless I happen to have a really crazy pair of like attack percentage boots that rolled really well into speed and have some crit rate and have some crit damage and have ascended speed. So I'm not losing too much speed over speed boots, just enough that it's, sane, whereas I'm getting a ton of extra attack. Rings, pretty easy. You're going to want to go with whatever the main stat is for the damage on the champion. If it's a max HP hitter, you could certainly go with something a little more defensive, but keep in mind that it may not be the flat stat up here that might be the most important. Because if I have triple attack percentage rolls in this HP ring, this could actually be my best ring just because of other stats it gives me. In this particular case here, being pinpoint, is giving me some extra speed and some extra accuracy because it fits on with the rest of this build. Keep in mind that this attack percentage could be a huge breaker on whether or not a ring is going to be really good for you, even if it is not the right main stat. There is no amulet that's going to be better than a crit damage amulet on any damage dealer that's going to be doing damage. Crit damage is just the way you rank up your damage. And finally, if you're not going with an accuracy banner, you want a banner that's going to increase the other stats that are going to be doing some damage. So yes, my Kale has an HP one that doesn't have any attack percentage. This was entirely to get him into this pinpoint, entirely to get the accuracy properly when I was struggling to build him. And because one of the last places I continued to use him, and honestly still use him occasionally, is Clan Boss, and I need him to survive. The ability to survive in Clan Boss means that this banner is very good for him, at least at the moment. Honestly, I should eventually plus 16 this banner because this banner is a good banner. It's just not a great banner for a Kale damage dealer, but it works for how I use Kale on this particular account. If I was looking for an ideal, I would be looking for attack or accuracy, and then I could sacrifice accuracy somewhere else in the build to do some more damage. But that's the very, very basics of building your damage dealers. But there's more to it than that. So masteries can be another great way to increase the damage of your champions. Some of them are pretty simple. Bonus crit rate? Yes, please. Bonus attack? Not quite as exciting, although if you have technically if you have enough crit rate in this build like I have with Kale, I could technically use this as a better mastery. But for me, I would rather sacrifice that 75 attack and always have this extra crit rate in case I need to rebuild the champion some other way and I need that extra 5% crit rate. So I think crit rate is certainly a little more important for the offense, but it is doable if you're trying to max out a champion and you're not lifting gear off of him anytime soon. But honestly, even the next level can be good. 5% extra attack when attacking with full HP. Well, if you have a champion that you know is going to be full most of the time, that's 5% extra damage. Period. Same on the other way around with this. 5% extra damage when attacking with 50% or less HP. Bonus damage. You're going to be attacking champions with shield. 25% more damage to champions with shield. And honestly, 10% crit damage. You'll pretty much always take this one with almost every build because there's really no reason not to, because again, crit damage is just flat bonus damage. As far as the offense here, single out can be very, very good against low HP targets. Very good for cleaning things up. I like to recommend this in Arena just because it's kind of nice to be able to clean up. Life Drinker can be a good way to keep your damage deal healed. It gives you basically a little bit of life steal if you're low on HP. That's not too bad for your champion doing a ton of damage, but it's not necessarily going to keep you super alive unless you are absolutely nuking and getting tons of HP at 5%. And again, it only works if you're at 50% or less HP on a per hit basis. Keep in mind, the moment you go above 50% HP, every hit after that does not trigger Life Drinker. Whirlwind of Death, one of the things that can keep your damage dealers doing damage is taking turns. So increase speed, great way to do more damage. Ruthless Ambush, if you know you're going first, particularly in Arena, this is great for that first hit. This is also really good for things like wave clear. Most seer builds, for example, that are wave clear one and done hits have Ruthless Ambush, and because it's 8% free damage. And I could go over all the rest of these offensive things. There's a lot of extra damage you can get in here as well. Some of the bigger ones here is Kill Streak can be great if you're doing a wave clear, because you continue to ramp up your damage again and again. If you're doing damage regularly on the A1, Methodical can be great, particularly for champions that counterattack with their A1. Methodical is a great way to add extra free damage. And finally, War Master can be great for some PvE. Giant Slayer can be good on multi-hitters, and to be fair, for multi-hitters for Giant Slayer, you're looking for generally multiple triple hitters for Giant Slayer to really be effective. Otherwise, War Master is just as good, possibly better, and a little more reliable as far as average damage is concerned. Looking for ultra consistently, Flawless Execution is 20% bonus crit damage. It's not bad. It's one I don't use too often anymore, though, because Helm Smasher at ignoring defense is king for your ignore defense damage dealing champions. Ignoring defense is huge. It's one of the biggest ways to ramp up your damage, at least if you don't have a natural cap on your damage, like a max HP hit in the first place. If you have a max HP damage dealer, Helm Smasher is not going to help them if you're already hitting the damage cap of 10% of a boss's max HP, for a boss at least. For the waves, yeah, Helm Smasher could actually be really, really good. But for a boss, you're not going to find Helm Smasher to be particularly great, just because you're probably already butting up against the 10% of the boss's max HP, or 5% in some cases already, and Helm Smasher is not going to add as much damage. And in those cases, that's where War Master or Giant Slayer actually are good again, because they are bonus damage based off the champion's max HP of the target. So for bosses, that's a bonus 3% extra damage that is not capped by the 10% max HP limit. Are you looking to join me and have fun playing Raid Shadow Legends? Well, I've got the link for you. Use my link down below and get yourself a free LNRL once you get through the tutorial. LNRL is a great legendary, does a bunch of poisons, does irresistible burns, explodes those poisons, going to be very, very great for progressing in the early game, great for your clan boss team, will really, really help you out. And then at level 15, get yourself an Ugo. Ugo is absolutely amazing. She is one of the best endgame epics. She brings your block debuffs, she brings your decreased defense, she's got a heal and a cleanse, she's got leech on that A1, she is super tanky, she's got a chance to revive. Absolutely amazing epic for you. All you need to do is start a brand new account using a brand new fresh email and use my link down below. Get started in Raid and have some fun. As you can see here, my Raphael is in a lethal set. That ignores 25% of the enemy's defense. Ignoring defense is one of the biggest ways to ramp up your damage. I talked about how crit damage was so critical. Back in the days when people struggled to get over 275 crit damage, or around 300 was considered very, very good, an amazing build. Doing 25% ignore defense was the equivalent of getting 50 to 75% extra crit damage. That's just generally how it tended to measure. Why? Well, the way defense works is defense reduces the amount of damage you take. Nice and simple. That's the way defense works. Ignoring 25% of an enemy's defense effectively shifts the scale downward significantly by how much damage an enemy ignores when you hit them. If somebody is taking, for example, 30% of the damage because their defense is so high, and you knock that down to where instead they're now taking 50% damage, you've actually added 66% damage. So how much defense affects how much damage you do can vary depending on how much damage you have. But when you could ignore a sizable chunk of defense on somebody, and just for example, against some bosses, ignoring 25% of their defense is 2,000 defense you're ignoring. That's a lot of defense. That's a lot of bonus damage. And that is why, as you climb later and later into the game, ignore defense is how you're going to do damage in Arena. Ignore defense is how you're going to do damage against Hydra boss, against Chimera boss, against the hard dungeon bosses. against Waves and Cintranos, ignore defense is going to ramp your damage up big time. And there's a couple different ways to do it. Obviously, Lethal is a good way to do it. Savage is another good set that can do it, and you can farm this from Fire Knights. Definitely work on farming your Savage. You've got the paid gear, Instinct gear, which is this stuff right here that only ignores 20%, not 25%, but that extra 12% speed is actually pretty cool. So don't sleep on Instinct gear. Very, very effective. The other big one as well, there's two big ones, I guess. Slayer gives you an opportunity to possibly ignore 30% of defense with AoE skills. Now keep in mind, these have to be true AoE skills. So if the skill says it does damage as an individual or single target attack, this ignore defense doesn't work. Specifically, I know there are a lot of people that like to put Thor in Slayer. Unless you can get him in that 9-piece Slayer, 6-piece Slayer is not doing you favors on 2 of his attacks because his A2 is a single target attack. And finally, one of the better sets that is free, but you got to farm it for a while, Merciless. Merciless in 6-piece is ignoring 35% ignore defense. That's huge, although it does take a full 6-piece set. Other ways you can certainly ignore some defense. If you're building a PvE champion, throwing some Cruel on gives you a little bit of ignore defense. 5% here, 5% there. You can get someone 10 or 15% with 2 or 3 sets of Cruel, I should say. And that can be an effective way to add damage to your champion. But ignoring defense is the way to go for just doing extra damage. And finally, there is setting up your damage dealers. And this is one of the more important things that you can do to make sure your damage dealers do a ton of damage. You want to do everything you can to give your damage dealers the biggest advantage you can give them. And this is a great example of a team designed to help my damage dealers do a ton of damage as quickly as possible. For Tholen, being an attack-based champion, as well as Michelangelo, who's an attack-based champion, we have the attack aura. So 30% additional attack in all battles. This is going to be off of the base stats, so it's not going to be a ton of extra attack. But in Tholen's case and Michelangelo's case, that is still going to be over 300 additional attack, which with multipliers that are 3 or 4 times as much as your race attack, that's 1,200 extra damage, then adding your extra multipliers in there as well. Plus, since that goes to your base stats, other things can help improve that damage as well. Next up, we of course have got Mithrala, and Mithrala has this wonderful ability to put increased defense and increase attack on everybody. Increase attack gives you a 50% increase in your attack stat, which is pretty much a flat 50% extra damage. Increase attack is a great way to do extra damage. Increased defense is going to give you 60% extra defense. That's going to help your defense-based damage dealers. And that's one of the few reasons why HP-based damage dealers struggle a little bit in matching the damage for attack and defense-based damage dealers, because these extra modifications, there is no such thing as increase max HP, the buff. Without that buff, HP-based damage dealers can't really get some of that extra damage that some of these attack-based damage dealers can do. Now, this is not going to help again with some max HP damage, for example, but in the case of Tholen and in the case of Michelangelo, who are the 2 main damage dealers on this team, that extra attack is going to help make them do a ton of extra damage. And then finally, we have Lydia, and Lydia is the perfect setup, or one of the perfect setups for your damage dealers, particularly in terms of wave content. You want, of course, weaken and decrease defense. Specifically, if you're always curious about what weaken does, because it's not particularly well described, increases damage received by the target champion by 15 or 25%. So 15 for the little one, 25 for the big one. Now, that's huge because obviously you want to be able to do extra damage. And so suddenly somebody taking 25% more damage because they have weaken on them is huge. Weaken is a big deal. But we also talked about ignoring defense. And of course, decreased defense is by 60% or 30% with a little one. Well, if their defense is already down by 60%, and then we're weakening them so they're taking more damage, and then we're ignoring defense because we have ignore defense pieces of gear, plus we are then ignoring more defense because we have Helm Smasher on, plus some of these champions can ignore additional defense as well based on some of their abilities. You start to not only get close to true damage where you're simply just doing their attack multiplier and damage, but even if you're not quite getting there, the fact that their base defense of the people that you're hitting, that you're then ignoring, is so much lower at 60% less, it really does ramp up the damage. Also, quickly, a fun fact. You'll notice that Weekend talked about damage taken. That means any form of damage taken, as far as I'm aware. So that means poisons do more damage to weakened opponents. That means burns do more damage to weakened opponents. That means bombs do more damage to weakened opponents. In fact, using weaken and bombs together was a meta for a little while before people realized that bombs did so much damage. If you had them set up on the right champion, you didn't need the weaken. But still, weaken is a great way to increase your damage all around, not just from your damage dealer. So finally, one of the more important things when you're leveraging your damage dealers is understand where there's a line for too much damage. And what do you mean by too much damage? Well, it's one thing, for example, to just want to hit a boss down and do them quickly as possible. And at some point in time, you're going to hit a point where doing more damage doesn't help you against a boss. You also can reach that point in Arena, for example. If you build your nuker good enough to take absolutely everybody down, they may be lacking in other stats as well. So at some point in time, there can be something called overkill with your damage. Particularly for max HP champions, for example, quite often, there's not a reason to go over a certain threshold of crit damage other than to say you've got that much crit damage, because you're not going to hit for all of that extra damage on every other ability. Cold Heart's max HP, for example, has got really good max HP multipliers, so she doesn't need 350 crit damage to be able to max out. It does help her other abilities a bit, but she's not a great damage dealer outside of that Heartseeker. So that Heartseeker is where you want to maximize that damage. And if you have to build the rest of her tanky to stay alive, you need all the extra accuracy to make sure she lands that turn meter decrease. Maybe you're actually looking to land other abilities with her as well, and you need her to go fast. You don't need to necessarily crank out her attack, crank out her damage either, because her crit damage is only going to max out so much. Her multipliers on other abilities aren't that great, and you're missing out on possibly other stats if you're just so focused on just doing pure damage. Damage is not going to be everything, but learning how to build and leverage your damage dealers is one of the big core skills that can make your raid journey so much better. So hopefully you found this interesting. Hopefully you found this educational. I would love to hear down below what you think of these direct damage dealers. Now, there are certainly other damage dealers I have not covered particularly well. Bomb champions are certainly their own unique things, and maybe I should actually do a little expose on building a bomb champion. That might be kind of fun. If you'd like to see something like that, or maybe other champions that I could certainly focus on, other types of builds, let me know down below. I would love to hear your feedback, and I'd love to hear you. What are some of your favorite nukers? Why do you love them? What do they do that make you enjoy using them as nukers so much? I would love to hear all of that stuff from down below. You guys are absolutely amazing. One of the best communities in Raid. I do want to thank Raid Shadow Legends for sponsoring this video. You guys are absolutely amazing. Much love, and until the next video, I am Bront, CatHerder.